The wolf was dying. Not slowly, not quietly. It was dying the way things die when nobody cares, with no sound, no ceremony, just a slow and steady disappearing. Soren Delacroix dropped to his knees in the frozen straw before the kennel even finished shaking from the wind, pushing through its broken slats. His hands moved fast. No hesitation. He pressed 2 fingers just below the animal's ribs and felt the shallow, broken rhythm of its breathing. A deep gash ran from its left shoulder all the way down its flank. Old blood. Dried. Infected. Nobody had touched it. He looked at the wound and said nothing. Just reached into the worn cloth bag strapped across his chest, the one the kennel master had already tried to confiscate twice, and pulled out a folded strip of linen soaked in pine resin. No one had given it to him. He had made it himself. From scraps. From things people threw away. That was what Soren did. He took what was left behind and made it useful. The wolf's golden eyes opened. A low vibration moved through its chest. Not a growl. Something in between. Something that said, "I don't trust you, but I'm too tired to fight." "I know," Soren murmured. "I know." He worked in the dark. The kennel torches had burned out before sunrise, and no one had bothered to relight them. The pack omegas assigned to the lower kennels rarely got torches replaced on time. That was just how things worked in Iron Ridge territory. Hi viewers. I want to ask you something personal right now. Have you ever taken care of something or someone that the world decided wasn't worth saving? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your story. The black wolf flinched when Soren pressed the cloth to its wound. A low warning sound rolled through the stall. Soren didn't pull back. He just kept moving. Steady. Calm. The way you move when fear has been in your body so long it stopped feeling like fear and just became the air you breathe. Deep inside the back corner of the kennel, tucked behind 2 hay barrels stacked against the east wall, something stirred. Small, warm, alive. A tiny gray wolf pup, no bigger than 2 fists pressed together, lifted its head and let out a noise that wasn't quite a bark. More like a question. Like it was asking, "Is it safe yet?" Soren glanced back. "Not yet," he whispered. "Stay." The pup dropped its chin back to the ground. It listened. That was the thing about Riven. From the very first night Soren had found him shivering and half buried in the wreckage of a destroyed supply cart. 3 weeks ago, just before the border raid closed off all the outer roads, the pup had listened. Like it had been waiting for a voice like his. Like it already knew. Soren finished wrapping the black wolf's wound. He sat back on his heels and exhaled. The wolf stared at him. Then something happened that made Soren's breath stop cold in his chest. The animal lifted its massive head slowly from the straw, and lowered it again. A bow. Not a flinch. Not a collapse. A deliberate, careful bow. Soren had worked in kennels long enough to know that war wolves did not do that. Not for anybody. Not even for the handlers who raised them from birth. He stared. The wolf stared back. And that was the exact moment the kennel doors exploded open. Not opened. Exploded. The force of it knocked loose 3 iron hook latches from the wall and sent straw spinning in every direction. Cold morning light flooded the barn like a wave, and with it came a pressure, thick and heavy and almost physical, that dropped the temperature in the room by what felt like 10 degrees. Soren spun around. 3 figures stood in the doorway, identical in height, identical in the cut of their jaw and the angle of their shoulders. All 3 dressed in black-plated armor etched with the mark of Iron Ridge's ruling house, a wolf skull crowned in iron. The triplet Alpha Kings. Kedrick, Valor, Driven. The kennel guards behind them had gone pale. One of them was already backing toward the far wall. Nobody breathed. Soren didn't move. Couldn't move. His knees were still in the dirty straw, his hands still stained with dried blood from the wound he'd been tending, and the giant black wolf he had just finished wrapping was standing now, standing fully upright, directly at his side. Valor's eyes moved to the wound dressing. Driven's eyes moved to the hay barrels in the corner. But Kedrick Varex, the oldest of the 3 by 4 minutes, which in pack law made him the one with final authority, looked at none of that. He looked only at Soren. And then the black war wolf did something no one in that room had ever seen before. It stepped forward, past Soren, past the straw, and it bowed its head low, slow, and unmistakable, directly toward the Kennel Omega still kneeling in the dirt. The silence that followed was the kind that changes things. Kedric's jaw tightened. His eyes did not leave Soren's face. And from the shadows behind the hay barrels, a small and very unaware wolf pup chose that exact moment to sneeze. If you're already hooked, drop a fire emoji in the comments and tell me, did you expect the wolf to bow? Nobody moved. The sneeze echoed. Valer's head turned toward the hay barrels. Dreven's hand moved to the short blade at his hip. And Kedric still hadn't looked away from Soren's face. That was the worst part. Not the blades. Not the armor. Not the weight of all three Alpha Kings filling the doorway like a wall of iron and bad decisions. It was the way Kedric was looking at him, like he was solving something. Soren rose slowly from the straw. His knees protested. His back ached. He'd been in the kennels since before the third bell of morning, and his body knew it. He straightened anyway, squared his shoulders, kept his face as still as he could manage, which wasn't very still at all. My lords. The Omega was assigned to kennel duty as pack discipline. We did not authorize. Leave. One word. From Kedric. Quiet as a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. The guards left. The door swung mostly shut behind them. Valer crouched near the hay barrels and peered through the gap between them. A small gray nose pushed back from the other side. Valer pulled his hand back. It's a pup. I know, Kedric said. How do you know? Soren asked before he could stop himself. The silence after that was thick enough to press against your skin. Kedric moved, not toward Soren, but toward the black wolf. He crouched low beside the animal and examined the dressing. The neat, tight wrap of linen and resin that had already started pulling the wound edges together. He pressed 2 fingers beside the knot, tested the tension, checked the edges, said nothing for a long moment. Then, who taught you to treat werewolves? Soren's jaw tightened. He said nothing, not defiance. He wasn't built for defiance. It was something simpler and more exhausting, the habit of a person who had learned that answering questions honestly was a fast way to have the things you cared about taken away. Kedric looked up at him. I'm not asking who sent you here, he said. I'm asking who taught you. Still nothing. Kedric stood. He was tall, they were all tall, the 3 of them, but there was something about the way he held himself that made the space he occupied feel deliberate. Like he had decided exactly how much room to take up and committed to it. He studied Soren for another long moment. Then he walked out. No punishment, no command, no word of explanation, just gone. Valer and Dreven followed. The kennel doors swung shut. Soren stood in the quiet and waited for his heartbeat to slow down. Took a while. Riven crept out from behind the hay barrels and bumped his tiny head against Soren's ankle. Yeah, Soren said softly. Me too. That night Soren ate his dinner in the kennel. He'd stopped eating in the pack hall 3 weeks ago, after the 3rd incident with the senior alphas who found his presence at the long tables offensive. He sat cross-legged on a crate, feeding Riven bits of bread soaked in warm broth, and tried not to think about the way Kedric Varex had looked at him like he was a problem to be understood rather than punished. He didn't sleep much. At some point past midnight, a sound woke him. Not loud. Just the soft press of weight against the kennel's side door, the smaller one, the one even the guards rarely used. He sat up. Nothing. Just the dark and the breathing of wolves settling in for the cold hours. In the morning, Soren found something beside Riven's crate that had not been there the night before. Fresh meat. Not scraps. Not the gristled bits thrown out from the pack kitchen. Good meat. Lean. Wrapped in clean cloth and placed just inside the door like it had been set down by someone who knew exactly where to put it. Soren stared at it for a long time. Riven did not stare. Riven launched himself at it without ceremony. Only one person knew the pup existed. Only one person had been close enough yesterday to catch the pup's scent. Soren looked at the wrapped meat, then at the door, then back at the meat. No signature, no explanation, just someone knew. And instead of using that knowledge against him, instead of reporting the unauthorized pup to the kennel master, which would have meant the pup's removal and Soren's second disciplinary mark in a month, someone had used it to feed a small, hungry animal. Soren did not know what to do with that. He picked up the cloth wrapping and folded it carefully and put it in his bag. Then he sat down in the straw beside Riven and watched the pup eat. Outside, the morning light shifted. Somewhere across the kennel yard, footsteps moved through the frost. Steady, unhurried, not heading toward the exit. Heading toward the kennel. Again, Riven had no sense of danger. That was the problem. For 3 weeks Soren had managed to keep the pup quiet, hidden, and invisible to anyone who walked through the kennel doors. He had arranged the hay barrels, memorized the guard rotation, learned which wolves made noise when strangers entered, so he could use their alerts as his own early warning system. He had a whole system. Riven destroyed it in approximately 11 seconds. It happened just after the second morning bell. Soren had his back turned, refilling the water troughs along the east wall, when he heard the small, quick scuffling of tiny paws crossing the kennel floor at full speed. He turned. Riven was gone from behind the hay barrels. The crate door, the one Soren had latched with 2 knots and a bent iron pin, was wide open. "No," Soren said. He dropped the water ladle and moved fast. Not fast enough. The front kennel door opened at the exact same moment Riven hit the middle of the floor at a dead sprint, tiny legs churning, ears flat with the pure and reckless joy of a pup who has been inside too long and has just discovered that outside exists. The figure stepping through the door had no time to react. Riven hit his boot, grabbed the bottom of his dark cloak with both forepaws and a set of very small, very determined teeth, and held on. Kedrick Varrex looked down. Soren froze 5 feet away with a water ladle in his hand and no explanation ready. The kennel went absolutely still. Even the wolves in the surrounding stalls went quiet. Even the ones that usually paced and growled when someone new walked in. Even the big black one, still healing in the far corner, just watched. Kedrick did not move for a long moment. Then slowly he crouched. He reached down and lifted Riven with both hands, carefully the way you handle something fragile when you're used to handling things that aren't, and brought the pup up to eye level. Riven stopped squirming immediately, just stared at him with wide yellow eyes, completely unafraid, like this was the most natural thing in the world. Kedrick's voice came out quieter than Soren expected. "This one shouldn't be alive." Soren's mouth went dry. "He is, though." "Yes." Kedrick turned the pup slightly, examining him. Not rough, but not the careful practiced gentleness Soren used either. He moved with the focused attention of someone reading a document, systematic, thorough. "Where did you find him?" And there it was. The question Soren had been waiting for since the moment he'd hidden the pup behind those hay barrels. He had 3 answers ready. He'd rehearsed them in the dark, lying in the straw at midnight, thinking through every possible version of this conversation. He had tested each one, decided which one held up. "Near the road," Soren said. Kedrick's eyes moved to his face immediately. Not to check for guilt, Soren had learned to control that. Something sharper. Something that recognized the gap in a half-truth the way a tongue finds a broken tooth. Kedrick knew. Not the specifics. Not yet. But the answer was incomplete, and that incompleteness was apparently visible to him. Kedrick Varrex was a man who had spent his entire life learning the difference between what people said and what they meant. He said nothing about it. That was somehow worse. He stood, still holding Riven, and looked at the pup for another long moment. Then his expression shifted, barely, just at the edges. Something moved behind his eyes that wasn't calculation or suspicion. It looked, for just a second, like recognition. "Who was with him when you found him?" Kedrick asked. "No one. He was alone." "That's not what I asked." Soren met his eyes, said nothing. Kedrick studied him. Riven, still cradled in the Alpha King's hands and apparently unbothered by the tension filling the room like smoke, yawned. Then he turned around in a slow circle 3 times in that specifically wolf way and curled up in Kedrick's palms. And went to sleep. Something moved across Kedrick's face so quickly Soren almost missed it. Almost. But it was there. A crack barely wider than a breath. Something that looked like it had once been grief and had been kept so long it had calcified into something harder. And this small, fearless, sleeping pup was pressing against that hardness with all the force of a thing that doesn't know what walls are. Kedrick lowered his eyes. He handed Riven back to Soren. Turned without a word. Walked to the door. Stopped. Near the road, he said quietly. Not a question. Not an accusation. Just those 3 words, placed in the air between them like a stone set down in the center of a path. Soren didn't answer. Kedrick left. Soren stood in the empty kennel with Riven warm and asleep in his arms, and one thought moving through him that he couldn't put down no matter how hard he tried. Kedrick Varex knew he was lying. And he had left anyway. By the time the 3rd bell rang that afternoon, the rumor had already spread to every corner of the Iron Ridge market. The Alpha King had been seen in the lower kennels. Again. Not just once. Multiple mornings now. Just the one Kedrick, but that was enough. In a pack where status moved through proximity the way disease moves through water, the simple fact of an Alpha King choosing where to spend his mornings was a political statement whether he intended it to be or not. And everybody had an opinion. Soren heard the first one before he'd even finished crossing the market square to pick up the grain allocation for the kennel horses. There he is. 2 Omegas near the dry goods stall. He knew their faces. Zarya Okoye and her cousin Brialyn, both bonded to mid-rank alphas, both with the kind of social standing that required constant maintenance. They didn't bother to lower their voices. That's the kennel boy? He doesn't look like anything special. That's the point, isn't it? The plain ones are always the most calculated. Soren kept walking. The grain vendor, a wide man named Tatum who'd always been decent enough to him before, looked up when Soren approached the counter, then looked away. I'm not selling to him today. Soren stopped. I have the kennel master's allocation slip. Don't care. The horses need. I said I'm not selling. Tatum's jaw was set. His eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Soren's left shoulder. Your place is the kennels. Go back to it. A small crowd had gathered. Not large. Just enough people to constitute an audience. Soren folded the allocation slip, pushed it back into his coat pocket, turned and walked away without another word, because every instinct he had told him that arguing was not how this ended. You don't win those arguments. You just become more visible. He got the grain from a secondary supplier near the south wall at twice the usual cost, using money from the small reserve he'd been building for 3 months in a cloth pouch stitched into his boot lining. He carried it back to the kennel on his own, 2 heavy sacks, without asking anyone for help. That evening he sat on the crate and did not eat. He wasn't hungry. Riven pressed up against his leg and stayed there. Around the second night bell, Soren heard the outer kennel door. Not the main one. The side door. The small one. He went still. Footsteps, quiet, deliberately placed, and then the soft sound of something being set down. Then nothing. Gone. Soren waited until he was sure before he crossed the kennel floor and opened the side door. A wooden crate sat just inside the threshold. Inside, bread, wrapped in waxed cloth. A ceramic jar of rendered fat, still faintly warm. A small paper envelope of dried herbs. The expensive kind, from the Eastern suppliers, not the dried-out dust from the local market stalls. And at the bottom, wrapped separately, 3 thick wool blankets. No name, no note, except at the very bottom of the crate, under the blankets, a small folded slip of paper. 2 words. Feed the pup. Soren turned it over. On the back, faint and pressed lightly, like someone had used the seal almost as an afterthought. A small circular mark. The wolf skull crowned in iron. The crest of the Alpha Kings. Soren held the slip of paper for a long time. The pack thought he was using the Alpha King. They thought he was maneuvering, playing some kind of long game that started with kennel work and ended with something they couldn't name but found suspicious. Because of course it was suspicious. People without power don't get singled out for good reasons. That was the accepted wisdom. That was how Iron Ridge worked. He understood why they believed it. He just couldn't explain that the truth was smaller and stranger and had nothing to do with strategy at all. He found a starving pup in the wreckage of a destroyed supply cart. He kept it alive because someone should. That was all. That had always been all. He folded the note and put it in his boot beside the emergency money. Then he opened one of the blankets and spread it over the pup's crate, so the cold couldn't reach him through the gaps in the boards. Riven turned twice, settled, and slept. Soren sat in the dark and looked at the royal seal folded into his boot and tried very hard not to think about what it meant that someone with that much power was choosing, deliberately, to be kind to someone with none. He failed at not thinking about it. He was still thinking about it when the pack night went quiet and the kennel settled into its low, warm breathing. And somewhere on the other side of the territory, in the high hall where the triplet Alpha Kings maintained their ruling seat, a lamp burned past midnight in an eastern window. It had burned there every night this week. He came after midnight. No armor this time, just a dark coat. No crest visible. No guards trailing at the edge of the kennel yard. Soren heard the side door open and was already sitting upright on his crate before the footsteps crossed the threshold. He'd gotten used to expecting them. That scared him more than he wanted to admit. Kedrick closed the door behind him. Didn't announce himself. Didn't need to. He moved to the low bench along the kennel's east wall, the one Soren used to set tools and supplies, and sat on it. Not like a man taking a seat out of necessity. Like a man who had decided the bench was acceptable and was giving it his full weight. He looked at Soren. You didn't eat today. Soren's jaw tightened. You had someone watching me. I had someone watching the market. You walked through it. He didn't justify the watching. Just let the information sit there, matter-of-fact and unashamed, the way powerful people state facts because they have never needed to apologize for knowing things. Soren crossed his arms. The kennel was quiet around them. The wolves were mostly asleep. Riven had wedged himself against the far corner of his crate and was producing small rhythmic snoring sounds that would have been funny under different circumstances. Why did you protect the pup? Kedrick asked. You asked me that already. You didn't answer. Soren looked at him. Because someone should. Kedrick let that land. Turned it over the way he turned everything over. Deliberately, without rushing. That's it? He said. That's it. No strategy. No angle. No. Kedrick looked at the crate where Riven slept. Something shifted in his face. Not visibly. Not in a way that anyone watching from a distance could have identified. Just a tightening, then a release. The way you look when something touches a part of you that you've trained yourself to stop touching. I had a pup, he said. Soren didn't respond, just listened. During the eastern border conflicts, 8 years ago, there was a pup. Young, maybe 4 months, that got separated from its pack during a raid. We found it in the field. My brothers wanted to leave it. The logistics were impossible, the campaign was still active, and a pup in a war zone is a liability. He stopped. A long pause. I swore I'd protect it. I made arrangements. Set up care. Another pause. Shorter this time. It didn't make it through the second week. The words came out flat. Not because he didn't feel them. Soren understood that now. The flatness wasn't distance, it was discipline. It was what happened to grief that had been carried so long it had learned to walk quietly. He said nothing for a moment. Then, I'm sorry. Not elaborate. Not performed. Just the 2 words, direct and without decoration. Kedrick looked at him. People don't usually say that to me. What do they say? Nothing. They wait for me to move on. Soren nodded slowly. He understood that too. Grief that belonged to powerful people made others uncomfortable in a specific way, They didn't know whether to acknowledge it or pretend they hadn't seen it, so they chose pretending. It was easier, less dangerous. Grief doesn't always make people cruel, Soren said. Sometimes it just makes them recognize it in other places. Kedrick was quiet. Outside, wind pressed against the kennel walls and then passed on. The black war wolf shifted in the far stall. One of the younger wolves made a low, half-asleep sound. The pup's scent, Kedrick said eventually. Riven. He carries a bloodline I've encountered before. From a pack in the southern corridor that went silent approximately 4 years ago. Soren's hands stilled. I noticed it the first time I held him, Kedrick continued. I've been running the information against our territorial records. He looked at Soren directly. The kind of look that had nothing in it except precision. Someone placed you here, Soren. In this kennel. With that pup. And I don't think it was the disciplinary committee. Soren's throat closed. Because it was true. He had known it for 3 weeks. Known it since the 3rd day, when the pieces started arranging themselves into a shape he didn't want to look at. The kennel assignment hadn't come from the standard rotation. The kennel master had received a written order from somewhere above him. Soren had seen the seal on the edge of that order when the master left it open on his desk. It wasn't the Alpha King's crest. It was something older. Something from inside the pack's administrative structure. Something that meant someone, somewhere in Iron Ridge's internal chain, had very specific reasons for wanting Soren isolated. Away from witnesses, away from allies, away from anyone who might ask the wrong questions. And whatever those reasons were, Riven was connected to them. Did someone send you here intentionally? Kedrick asked. The kennel felt very small. Soren looked at the floor, then at the crate where Riven slept, then back up at the man across from him, the man who had left fresh meat and blankets in the dark, who had sat on a low bench after midnight in a working kennel without armor or ceremony, who had just told him about a dead pup that had never been mentioned to anyone in 8 years. He opened his mouth, closed it. Yes, he said finally. Someone sent me here. Kedrick did not look surprised. He looked something else entirely. He looked like a man who has just confirmed that the danger is real, and has already decided that it doesn't change what he's going to do. The lamp in the kennel flickered once. Riven slept on, completely unaware that the conversation happening 3 feet from his crate had just turned into something neither of them could walk back from. And somewhere inside the Iron Ridge Administrative Hall, a second lamp burned in a different kind of window. Not warm, not steady, but watching. The same way it had been watching Soren since the day he arrived. The document was real. That was the part Vaylor kept coming back to. Not forged. Not a copy. The original administrative transfer order. The one that had sent Soren Delacroix to the lower kennels 11 weeks ago. Was sitting on the research table in the East Records room with the original ink still crisp on pressed official paper, and the seal stamped into it belonged to a man named Aldrich Voss. Aldrich Voss, Chief Logistics Coordinator of the Iron Ridge Internal Trade Commission. The same commission that managed the pack's border cargo routes. The same routes that had gone dark 4 years ago when a Southern Pack convoy disappeared without a trace. Vaylor set the document down carefully. Looked at Dreven across the table. Dreven didn't say anything for a moment. Then, he used the disciplinary system as a filing mechanism. Yes. He didn't send Soren to the kennels as punishment. No. He sent him there to disappear. Vaylor picked the document back up. Read the transfer order again from the beginning, not because he'd missed anything, but because sometimes the second read was where the full weight of a thing landed. It landed. This is important. Pause on that. Someone inside the Iron Ridge administrative structure had deliberately buried a person in the lowest status assignment the pack had, in a location with no social contact, no record of daily movement, and no standing to make formal complaints. And they had done it using a bureaucratic mechanism so routine that no one would question it. Not a punishment. Isolation. The pup was the key. Riven carried the bloodline of the vassal pack. A mid-territory pack of 43 wolves that had accepted a protection contract with Iron Ridge's Trade Commission 4 years ago. 30 days after signing, the vassal pack was gone. No bodies recovered. No formal investigation opened. The commission had filed a single report citing territory abandonment and closed the matter. The report had been filed by Aldrich Voss. Driven leaned back in his chair and let out a long, controlled breath. He left a survivor, one pup, and it ended up in the supply cart wreckage from a border raid connected to his own routes. The pup was being moved, Vaylor said, transported somewhere, until the cart was hit, until Soren found him. They both sat with that for a moment. 43 wolves, a trade contract, a logistics coordinator who had used his position to bury both the crime and the only witness to it. A witness who happened to be small and gray and currently sleeping in the lower kennels under the care of a pack omega who had no idea what he was holding. Or did he? Vaylor looked at his brother. Soren said someone sent him there. He did. He said it to Kedrick. Directly. I know. Which means whoever sent him there, whoever gave him a reason to be in that kennel, either wanted him isolated permanently, or, Driven said quietly, wanted him exactly close enough to the pup to keep it alive until someone worth trusting found them both. The room went still. Outside the records hall, the territory moved through its afternoon like nothing was wrong. Market bells, patrol rotations, the low hum of a pack that didn't know its own internal structure had been used as a weapon. On the table between Vaylor and Driven sat one more piece of paper, newer than the transfer order, pulled from the commission's current routing schedule. Aldrich Voss had a territory inspection scheduled for the lower kennels. 3 days from now. He's coming to check, Driven said. He's coming to finish it, Vaylor replied. He folded the routing schedule into his coat pocket and stood. They had 3 days, and Soren had no idea. The fire started at the second night bell. No warning. No smell of smoke building slowly the way fires usually announce themselves. Just light, sudden and wrong, bleeding through the kennel's east-facing window slats like the sun had risen in the wrong direction. Soren was awake instantly. The east wall was burning. Not a small fire. Not a loose torch that had fallen. The entire section of dry timber and packed straw along the outer wall had caught at once. The kind of catch that only happens when something has been prepared. When someone has been thorough. Soren moved. He grabbed Riven first. The pup was already awake, pressed against the back corner of his crate with his ears flat and his whole small body shaking. Soren pulled him out, tucked him against his chest, and turned toward the main doors. They were locked, not stuck, locked, from the outside. He hit them once with his shoulder. Nothing. Hit them again. The iron bar holding them had been dropped into the exterior brackets, the kind used to keep wolves in, not people out, and it held. The smoke was already thick along the ceiling. Soren dropped low. The wolves in the surrounding stalls had started calling. Not howling, not the way wolves did in territorial alerts, but a different sound entirely. Shorter, sharper. The sound animals make when they understand what is happening and are running out of time. He couldn't leave them. He unlatched the nearest 3 stalls. Working fast, not thinking, muscle memory from 11 weeks of kennel work taking over where his hands knew the mechanisms even in the dark and smoke. The wolves ran past him toward the back of the kennel, away from the fire wall, pressing against the far end where the air was still thinner but breathable. He got to 6 stalls before the smoke dropped and his eyes stopped working. He went down to one knee. Riven made a sound against his chest that Soren had never heard from the pup before. Something urgent. Something that wasn't a question this time. The main doors exploded inward. Not from fire. From force. The iron bar, the solid, locked iron bar, bent. And then it snapped. And the doors swung open with enough momentum to crack the left one off its upper hinge. And cold night air rushed in so fast it felt like being caught by a wave. And standing in the doorway with splinters of doorframe still falling around him was Kedrick Varex. No armor. He had clearly run from somewhere that wasn't close. His eyes found Soren on the floor in the smoke before anything else. Before the wolves. Before the fire. He crossed the kennel in 4 steps, got one arm under Soren's arm and hauled him upright like he weighed nothing, and kept moving, both of them, toward the open door, Soren's feet finding the ground again as the air cleared and his eyes started working and the cold hit his face like a correction. They cleared the threshold. Soren's knees hit the dirt outside and he sat there for a moment just breathing. Riven crawled up from where he'd been pressed against Soren's chest and put both forepaws on Soren's shoulder and stared at his face with those wide yellow eyes. Kedrick stood over both of them. His chest was moving hard. His jaw was tight. There was something in his expression that Soren had not seen there before. Something uncontrolled and unguarded and very, very close to the surface. Pack guards were arriving now. Valor and Driven behind them, both moving fast from the direction of the main hall. The wolves Soren had freed were pressing out through the open kennel door in a line. 6 of them, the big black war wolf at the end. All of them moving away from the smoke and stopping at the edge of the kennel yard to watch. One of the arriving guards started towards Soren with the clear intention of managing the situation. Kedrick turned. One look. The guard stopped. The pack yard had gone quiet except for the crackle of the east wall still burning and the distant sound of the water carriers being called in from the far quarter. Dozens of people were watching. Pack members who had been asleep an hour ago, pulled out by the fire bells, standing in the cold with their cloaks half-fastened, all of them looking at the same thing. The Alpha King, kneeling in the dirt beside a kennel Omega, making sure he was breathing. Kedrick's voice came out low and very precise. You will not die in a kennel. It wasn't dramatic. He wasn't performing for the crowd. That was the thing that made it land so hard. He meant it, specifically, personally, the way you mean something when you've already decided, and the decision isn't new. Soren looked up at him. Who locked the doors? He asked. Kedrick's expression didn't change, but his eyes did. We know, he said. And from the far edge of the kennel yard, where the watching crowd had gathered in its half-dressed, firelit cluster, one figure had stopped watching. One figure was moving, quietly, away from the crowd, toward the eastern road. Valor saw him first. The Iron Ridge Council Hall held 112 seats. Every single one of them was filled. Soren stood at the center of the floor. Not by choice. He hadn't been given one. The summons had arrived at dawn. Formal, sealed, written in the precise administrative language that meant this was not a conversation and attendance was not optional. He'd been given 2 hours to appear, which was not enough time to prepare and exactly enough time to be afraid. He was afraid. He stood anyway. The council's senior elder, a wide-shouldered man named Devin Ashford, occupied the head chair with the specific stillness of someone who had decided the outcome of a meeting before it started. Beside him sat 6 other elders, 4 of them visibly hostile, 2 of them carefully neutral in the way that meant they were watching which direction the power was moving before they committed. The hall smelled like old wood and formal grievance. The matter before this council, Devin Ashford began, is the question of continued disruption to pack order originating from the lower kennel assignment. He paused. Let the framing settle. We have received 3 formal complaints. The first alleges manipulation of an Alpha King through deliberate exploitation of sympathy. The second alleges unauthorized harboring of a foreign pack animal within Iron Ridge territory. The third, said a voice from the back of the hall, can wait. Kedrick Varex walked through the center aisle. He hadn't been announced. Protocol required announcement. He walked through anyway, and no one in the hall moved to stop him because no one in the hall was prepared to be the person who tried. He reached the floor, stood beside Soren, not behind him, not in front of him, beside. The hall went to a different kind of quiet. Elder Devin Ashford's jaw tightened. My lord, the council has authority over matters of. I know what the council has authority over, Kedrick said. His voice was even, almost conversational, which somehow made it worse. I've read the charter 17 times. I helped rewrite Section 4. He turned to face the room. Not Soren. Not the elders. The whole room. All 112 seats. The first complaint cites manipulation. The manipulation alleged is that an Omega in kennel assignment gained the attention of an Alpha King through calculated sympathy. He paused. The wolf in that kennel had a 3-day-old infected wound that would have killed it by morning. The Omega treated it. Alone. Before sunrise. Using materials he made himself because none were provided. Silence. That is not manipulation. That is competence. In a place where competence was not expected and not resourced and not acknowledged. That matters. He let that land. The second complaint cites an unauthorized foreign animal. The animal in question is a wolf pup carrying the bloodline of the vassal pack. A shift moved through the room. A few elders exchanged glances. The vassal pack, Kedra continued, signed a protection contract with this pack's trade commission 4 years ago and disappeared 30 days later. That disappearance was filed as territory abandonment by Aldrich Voss, Chief Logistics Coordinator, who was also, as my brothers have confirmed in the last 12 hours, the individual who issued the transfer order placing Soren Delacroix in the lower kennels. The room did not go quiet. It went loud. Not panic. Not outrage. The specific chaotic sound of a room full of people recalculating everything they thought they understood simultaneously. Elder Devon Ashford raised his hand for order. Kedrick waited until he had it. Aldrich Voss is currently in custody. My brothers apprehended him at the Eastern Road last night, following his departure from the scene of a deliberately set kennel fire. He said it plainly, like he was reading inventory. The investigation into the vassal pack's disappearance is open as of this morning. More noise, louder this time, and then, from the far left of the council floor, one of the hostile elders stood up. His name was Fenwick Jarvis, and he had never once in 15 years of council service said anything that surprised anyone. He surprised everyone now. Even so, Fenwick said, his voice carrying through the noise. The Alpha King's behavior toward this Omega has been irregular. Whatever the administrative situation, whatever Voss may or may not have done, the question of why you have been present in those kennels, repeatedly informally at hours that he is under my protection, Kedrick said. Simple. Absolute. The gasps that moved through the room were the kind that didn't need amplification. In pack law, formal protection by an Alpha King was not a casual declaration. Carried legal standing. It changed a person's social classification. It was, in the technical language of the charter Kedrick had helped rewrite, a claim of personal responsibility, meaning the protected person's safety became the Alpha King's direct concern and any challenge to that person was a challenge to the throne. Nobody in the hall was confused about what had just been said. Kedrick stepped forward. His eyes moved briefly, just for a second, to Soren's face, then back to the room. That Omega belongs to me, he said. And this council is going to hear the full account of what was done to him and to the vassal pack before anyone in this room files another complaint about the lower kennels. Devon Ashford opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, found nothing to say, and in the third seat from the left, one of the two carefully neutral elders, a woman named Celestine Morrow who had said nothing for the entire session, picked up her pen and started writing. The council hall had cleared out by midday. Not resolved. Soren sat on the bench and looked at the floor and tried to organize the last several hours into something that made sense in sequence. It didn't really cooperate. They were quiet for a moment. Then Soren said, "You didn't ask me." Kedrick turned his head slightly. "In the council hall," Soren continued, "you told a room full of people that I belong to you. You didn't ask me first." Kedrick held that. Didn't deflect. Didn't reframe it. Just let the weight of it sit exactly where Soren had put it. "You're right," he said. 2 words. No elaboration. No defensive explanation. No version of, "but you understand the circumstances," or "it was the only available move," or any of the other things powerful people said when they had decided that the outcome of their choice justified the choice itself. Just, "You're right." Soren looked at him. "I've been in situations where people made decisions about me," Soren said. "My whole life. Where I go. What I'm assigned to. What I'm worth. And they always had a reason. Always a good one. Always something that sounded like protection but felt like... He stopped. Kedrick waited. It felt like being handled, Soren finished. Like a problem being managed. Not like a person being considered. The narrow window put a thin line of afternoon light across the stone floor between them. Kedrick was quiet for long enough that Soren started to think maybe that was the end of it, that there was nothing more to say and they would sit here in this small room and then eventually leave and the distance between them would settle back into something safer and more familiar. Then Kedrick said, "I know what that feels like." Soren blinked. "Not the same way you do," Kedrick said. "I'm not saying that. But I was born a triplet into a power structure that had 1 throne and 3 heirs and a charter that named me first by 4 minutes. Nobody asked if that was what I wanted. Nobody asked Valor or Dreven either. We were told what we were before we were old enough to decide." He paused. "I have spent 20 years trying to be careful with that. Trying to not replicate it." A breath. "And today I stood in front of 112 people and announced ownership of another person without looking at his face first." Soren stared at him. "I'm not asking you to forgive it as a tactic," Kedrick said. "I'm telling you it was wrong. And I'm asking, now correctly in the right order, if you will accept my protection. Not because the council needs to hear it. Not because of what it does for your legal standing. Because I am asking you if you want it." The question sat in the room like something solid. Soren looked at the floor, at the thin line of light. He thought about the fresh meat left before sunrise, the wool blankets, the note that said "feed the pup." The man who had told him about a dead wolf in a war zone 8 years ago like it was something he had never been able to put down. He thought about what it cost to trust something. Really trust it, not just accept it because there was no other option. "I was afraid," Soren said quietly, "that if I believed someone could choose me, really choose me, not because I was useful or convenient or positioned in exactly the right place, that I would believe it wrong. That I would be wrong about it. And it would be worse than not having believed it at all." Kedrick looked at him, not with the focused precision he usually carried. Something else. Open. Careful. Waiting. "You're not wrong," Soren said. And then from the small crate Soren had carried into the anteroom, the one sitting against the far wall that he had not left the kennel without in 11 weeks, came a sound. A small, sleepy, completely unconcerned bark. Riven pushed the crate door open with his nose, walked the 4 steps across the stone floor, and crawled directly into Kedrick's lap. Turned around 3 times. Settled. Kedrick looked down at the pup. Something in his face shifted, not breaking exactly. More like a thing that had been held closed for a very long time, choosing, finally, to just be open. He reached down and put one hand on Riven's back, and did not move for a long, long moment. 3 weeks later, the kennel was still standing. The east wall had been rebuilt, new timber properly sealed, with actual torch brackets that were actually maintained. The commission investigation had turned up enough documentation to keep Aldrich Voss in a holding cell for the foreseeable future, and opened inquiries into 3 additional trade routes with irregularities that nobody had looked at closely enough until now. Celestine Morrow, the council elder who had started writing in the 3rd seat from the left, had submitted a formal motion for the review of all administrative transfer orders issued through the discipline channel over the last 7 years. Passed by 9 votes. That mattered. Not just for Soren. For everyone in the pack who had been managed rather than considered. And there were more of them than the council had been comfortable acknowledging. The pack was not fixed. Packs don't fix in 3 weeks. But it was asking questions it hadn't been asking before. Out loud. In rooms with records being kept. That was something. Soren Delacroix no longer worked in the kennels. He had been given, with formal documentation, signed by all 3 Alpha Kings, the position of Pack Wolf Sanctuary Coordinator. It was a new title. Nobody had held it before because nobody had thought to create it before. The position carried its own territory allotment, its own supply budget, and the specific authority to override kennel master decisions on the welfare of any animal in Iron Ridge's care. It was a real job. He was good at it. The black war wolf, whose name Soren had eventually learned was Caius, had recovered fully. He lived in the sanctuary's outer run now, with the other 6 wolves Soren had freed on the night of the fire. They were not tame. They were not pets. But they came to Soren's voice, and when new animals arrived injured and afraid, Caius was always the one who approached them first. Riven had grown. Not enough to be mistaken for an adult wolf. He was still small, still ridiculous, still operating on the conviction that personal space was a rule that applied to everyone except himself. But his coat had filled into a thick, healthy gray, and his yellow eyes had sharpened, and he moved through the sanctuary now like he owned it, which he more or less did. He had claimed 3 favorite sleeping spots. 2 of them were in the sanctuary. One of them was the center of Kedrick Varex's working desk in the East Hall, which Kedrick had stopped trying to reclaim approximately 12 days ago. Soren had watched that particular surrender with something he couldn't name exactly but that sat warm in his chest. On a late afternoon in the 4th week, Kedrick came to the sanctuary. Not on official business. Not with guards. Just himself in a plain coat, in the hour before the evening bells when the light went low and gold over the outer runs and the wolves settled into their end-of-day routines. Soren was checking the water lines along the north run when he heard footsteps on the path behind him. He didn't need to look. He knew the sound of them by now. They stood together for a moment at the run fence, watching Caius pace the perimeter of the outer territory in his slow, deliberate evening way. Riven was somewhere behind them, working through what appeared to be a very personal disagreement with a pinecone. "The council motion passed," Kedrick said. "I heard. Celestine wants to expand the review to financial records." "Good." A pause. Kedrick turned slightly. "Not fully. Just enough. How are you?" Not, "How is the sanctuary?" or "Are the wolves settled?" or any of the other versions of that question that had a professional answer. Just, "How are you?" Soren looked at the outer run, at the wolves moving through the last of the afternoon light. "I think," he said slowly, "I'm learning what it feels like when a day ends and you don't have to brace for what comes next." Kedrick was quiet. Then, without any announcement or ceremony, he turned to face Soren fully and said, "Stay." Not a command. Soren had heard Kedrick give commands. This was not one. Not because I declared something in a council hall. Not because of protection standing or pack law or any of it. He paused. "Stay because you want to. Stay because this is the place that chose you back. Stay because—" He stopped himself, looked at the ground for just a second, then back up. "Will you stay because you choose me?" The evening bells hadn't rung yet. The wolves were still moving. Riven had abandoned the pinecone and was sitting 3 feet away watching both of them with the attentive, unblinking interest of an animal who understood exactly what kind of moment this was. Soren looked at Kedrick. At the man who had left food in the dark and told the truth about a dead pup and walked into a burning building and said "you're right" when he was wrong and asked instead of declared when it mattered. "Yes," Soren said. Simple. No elaboration. Just yes. Riven sneezed. Caius, across the outer run, paused his evening pacing and turned to look at the 3 of them. One massive, fully recovered war wolf, perfectly still, watching with gold eyes in the fading light. Then he lowered his head. Not at Kedrick. The same way he had bowed that very first morning in the frozen kennel. The Soren. The evening bells rang. The sanctuary settled. And in a world built entirely on who had power over whom, the rarest thing wasn't a throne. It wasn't dominance. It wasn't even safety. It was this, a person who had been handled their whole life being asked, finally, by someone who meant it, "What do you choose?" And getting the space to answer. That's the story. Soren didn't win because he was powerful. He won because he kept showing up for a dying wolf, for an orphaned pup, for himself, in a system that was designed to make him invisible. And sometimes that's all it takes. One person in a dark kennel, choosing to care when nobody was watching. If the story moved something in you, if you've ever been in a place where someone else decided your worth and you had to find it yourself anyway, I want to hear from you. Drop your story in the comments. Tell me what you took from this. Your words might be exactly what someone else in that comment section needs to read today. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now and turn on notifications. Every story on this channel is built to stay with you, the kind that makes you think, makes you feel, and reminds you what people are capable of when they choose kindness over power. You found this story for a reason. Don't miss the next one.